Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a full financial audit on the richest person to ever walk the earth, 14th century Emperor Mansa Musa. But we're going to do something a little bit different for this one. We're going to treat his legendary Mali empire exactly like a modern megacorporation and evaluate Mansa Musa as its ultimate CEO. It's a really fascinating way to look at history through the lens of modern economics.
Okay, let's just dive right into this staggering estimated net worth. $400 billion. I mean, that is a figure so massive that economic historians legitimately struggle to even comprehend it. You see, when you're trying to calculate the wealth of a medieval emperor, you aren't just looking at a bank account. You're looking at total absolute control over land, resources, and entire trade routes. Musa's wealth wasn't tied up in volatile stock options, it was tangible, physical wealth. It's an economic scale that kind of breaks our modern understanding of money entirely. To put that into perspective, Musa's historically documented wealth completely eclipses the fortunes of our modern billionaires. Even at Elon Musk's absolute peak estimated wealth of around $300 billion, or Jeff Bezos' massive fortune, they are still falling well short of Mansa Musa's estimated $400 billion. And remember, modern billionaire wealth fluctuates literally every day with the stock market. Musa's wealth, it was rock solid, grounded in the unshakable global demand for precious metals. So how exactly did he build and manage this unprecedented fortune? Well, today we're going to review his financial portfolio by covering 4 key areas. 1. A monopoly on gold. 2. The ultimate PR campaign. 3. Crashing the gold market. And 4. Reinvesting in the empire. Let's get into it.
Starting with Section 1, a monopoly on gold. The crucial point to grasp here is the economic concept of a monopoly, which is the exclusive control of the supply or trade in a commodity. Mansa Musa controlled a true market monopoly over the Bambouk and Bur goldfields. Think of this exactly like a modern tech giant controlling a digital ecosystem, like Apple with its App Store. Because Musa controlled the primary source of the gold, he completely dictated the market. Every single ounce of gold that moved through his vast territory was his to tax, leverage, and profit from. He literally set the terms.
But here's the real genius of how he managed these assets to ensure constant cash flow. While Mali had immense underground gold resources, they also placed heavy value on life-sustaining commodities, specifically salt and copper alloys. By carefully taxing the trans-Saharan exchange of his abundant gold for these incredibly essential everyday resources, Musa ensured a constant, practically immeasurable stream of revenue. He was essentially running the world's most lucrative import-export business, and he held all the leverage.
Moving right along to Section 2, the ultimate PR campaign.
So, in 1324, Mansa Musa undertook the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. But honestly, calling this a trip does not even come close to doing it justice. The sheer logistics were absolutely staggering. We're talking about a caravan of 60,000 traveling men, 12,000 enslaved people, 500 servitors, each carrying a 6-pound solid golden staff, and 100 camels, each hauling up to 300 pounds of gold dust. Rather than just a religious journey, this was the ultimate international marketing campaign. It was a massive foreign stimulus package designed to put the Mali Empire on the global map. Imagine a modern CEO taking a 60,000-person entourage on a multinational corporate tour, just handing out millions of dollars in cash at every single stop.
And you know what? His extravagant PR tour worked flawlessly. By flooding foreign cities with these opulent gifts, he deeply impressed foreign dignitaries. The famous 1375 Catalan Atlas perfectly captures the result of his marketing genius. European cartographers were so astounded by the reports they were hearing that they literally drew him onto the map, holding a giant gold coin. I mean, that is the 14th century definition of global brand recognition.
Which brings us to Section 3, crashing the gold market.
We actually have hard economic data from Mamluk Cairo that illustrates this perfectly. Before Musa arrived in 1324, gold had a very high value, trading at roughly 25 silver dirhams per 1 gold coin. But after Musa flooded the city with his golden gifts and extravagant spending, the exchange rate plummeted to 19 silver dirhams per gold coin. This brilliantly illustrates basic supply and demand. By massively increasing the supply of free gold in Cairo, he completely diluted its scarcity and therefore tanked its value.
That staggering shift equates to a roughly 24% drop in gold's purchasing power. To put that in perspective for a second, imagine if the US dollar or the euro lost a quarter of its value virtually overnight. For local merchants in Cairo, this effectively acted like a devastating modern stock market crash. The cost of everyday goods absolutely skyrocketed because the gold people were using to buy them was suddenly worth way less. It was a classic case of demand-pull inflation completely caused by one man's wallet.
Now, to gently correct some of those wild internet rumors you might have seen floating around, Mansa Musa wasn't some reckless trillionaire who ruined the entire world economy forever. But, as the Arab historian Al-Umari recorded, this depressed state of affairs lasted for about 12 years. So while he didn't destroy the globe, Musa absolutely caused a severe, decade-long regional recession in Egypt simply by being way too generous. Let that sink in.
Finally, let's look at Section 4. Reinvesting in the empire. So, Mansa Musa takes the throne in 1312, consolidates his monopoly, and undertakes his extravagant Hajj in 1324. But the crucial pivot in his strategy happens in 1325. Upon his return, he captures the city of Timbuktu and immediately begins construction on the Jingarai Bear University. Actually, the big takeaway here is that he didn't just hoard his immense wealth or spend it all on luxury goods, he intentionally reinvested it right back into his headquarters.
His return on investment, his ROI, was massive. He essentially poured his wealth into corporate R&D and human infrastructure. He funded the construction of the 700-year-old Jingarai Bear University. He imported top-tier talent, bringing Arab scholars and the famous architect Abu Ishaq Ibrahim as-Sahali back with him. He funded new architectural technologies, introducing burnt bricks and pyramidal minarets to the region. And he established vast libraries and madrasas, creating an advanced local book copying industry. He completely transformed Timbuktu into a thriving Silicon Valley-esque intellectual hub for global Islamic scholarship and science.
The wealthiest man in history built a legacy defined by education, architectural innovation, and trans-Saharan cultural exchange. Through these massive reinvestments into his empire, he cemented Mali's lasting historical prominence far, far beyond the temporary, shiny allure of his gold. He proved that the ultimate wealth isn't just what you extract from the ground, but the human capital and infrastructure you build above it.
And I'm going to leave you with this final open question. If the absolute richest guy in human history is remembered most for what he built, what he taught, and what he gave away, how exactly are we going to remember the billionaires of today? It is truly fascinating to consider the immense...
Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to just imagine for a second that we've stepped right out of a time machine. It's the early 1900s, and as an urban historian of this era, I'm just absolutely awestruck by what's happening in the skies right above us. We are literally witnessing an architectural revolution, watching these gravity-defying metal skeletons rise impossibly high into the clouds. So today, we're diving into the insane, almost unbelievable logistics of early skyscrapers, and the master craftsmen who built them without a single one of the modern safety nets we take for granted today. Picture yourself standing on the bustling, chaotic, incredibly loud streets of Manhattan. You tilt your head back, and hundreds of feet up in the air, men are just casually tossing white-hot steel through the open sky. It was a spectacle that literally stopped traffic. Passers-by would just freeze on the sidewalks, totally mesmerized. The New York Times absolutely hit the nail on the head when they famously dubbed it the best open-air show in town. But to understand exactly how this incredible show came together, we really need to look at what forced our cities into the sky in the first place. Now, to my early 1900s eyes, the problem we were facing was painfully obvious. Our rapidly growing American cities were entirely running out of ground. The only direction left to go was up. But traditional masonry walls had this very strict, hard limit. Think about it. If you wanted to build taller, the base of the walls had to grow drastically thicker just to support all that immense weight. Eventually, your walls were consuming the very floor space you were trying to sell. Then, the Bessemer process changed everything. By blasting air through molten iron to strip out impurities, we could suddenly produce steel at an industrial scale. Overnight, buildings could rise on an incredibly thin metal skeleton. The walls carried absolutely nothing. The steel carried the whole shebang. But of course, manufacturing the steel is really just step one, right? Someone actually had to go up there and connect those massive beams. Enter the ironworker. These early tradesmen were operating in a world completely devoid of safety regulations. No safety nets, no harnesses. There was absolutely nothing between them and the ground below except their physical judgment and years of practice. You definitely didn't learn this trade sitting in a classroom. You learned it through proximity, endless repetition, and the incredibly severe consequences of getting it wrong. And if you were observing these construction sites day in and day out like I do, you'd quickly notice that among the absolute most skilled of these men were the Mohawk ironworkers. Hailing from the Kanawaki community near Montreal, these guys had been working high steel since 1886. By the early 20th century, they were absolutely essential. I mean, if there was a major structural project going up anywhere in New York City, the Mohawk ironworkers were there. quite literally shaping the skyline. In fact, in their community over in Brooklyn, there was this local bar that proudly hung a sign right above its doors reading, "The greatest iron workers in the world pass through these doors." And up on the job site, hundreds of feet in the air, these men often spoke their own languages. They possessed this absolute unwavering trust in one another, because at those dizzying heights, that trust wasn't just sentimental, it was entirely structural. Their lives depended on it. But hold on, before these men could even lay a finger on the steel, there was this staggering logistical puzzle to solve. Cities like New York had zero room for stockpiling materials. So every single beam was fabricated off-site and numbered according to its precise position in the structure. They had to be delivered in the exact sequence they would be installed. If a shipment arrived out of order, or honestly just got delayed in traffic, the entire site ground to a halt. Hundreds of men stood idle. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. Once the beams finally did arrive, they were hoisted up floor by floor using these massive derrick cranes powered by incredibly loud steam engines and later on internal combustion engines. Imagine the sheer sensory overload of being on this site. Voices couldn't possibly carry over the deafening roar of the engines and the howling wind, so they were entirely dependent on gestures. They used just their bodies to signal weight, direction, and timing, slowing and steering tons of swinging steel until it landed within mere inches of its target. Okay, so the beam is in position. Now it has to be connected permanently. And you might be wondering, well, why not just weld it? Interestingly, early arc welding actually did exist by the late 19th century, but engineers outright rejected it. Why? Because steel quality back then varied wildly from batch to batch. A weld might look totally sound on the surface, but it could be hiding dangerous microscopic fractures inside. At 300 feet in the air, under massive shifting loads, a hidden fracture was a fatal disaster waiting to happen. So instead, they relied on a highly visible, immediate, and permanent method, riveting. In this riveting process, it was an incredible, highly choreographed dance, requiring a four-man gang working in a rapid, uninterrupted rhythm. It goes like this. First, the heater pulls a glowing orange white-hot rivet from a portable forge and just hurls it through the open air. Second, the catcher grabs this flying molten metal in a battered tin can. Third, the bucker-up immediately presses it firmly into the pre-drilled hole. And finally, the driver sets a heavy pneumatic hammer and drives the other end flat against the steel. And get this, they had to execute this entire, highly dangerous sequence in a shrinking window of under 20 seconds. If the alignment was off, or if the men hesitated and the rivet cooled before it was fully seated, the connection was completely ruined. But if they hit that 20-second window, the rivet would cool in place. As it cooled, the metal contracted, physically pulling the massive steel plates together into an incredibly tight grip that simply could not be undone. There is this incredible moment described in accounts from the 1890s when a riveting gang truly finds its rhythm. The forge glows. The toss is clean, the catch is immediate, the hammer begins before the echo of the catch even finishes. It's a series of short, precise, bone-jarring impacts. Then silence. And before you know it, the next rivet is already in the fire. On a good day, multiple gangs worked simultaneously across the floor, feeding off each other's pace. The rhythmic booming literally echoed for blocks, creating that captivating open-air show. But actually, scratch that. Even a perfectly riveted skeleton was hiding a fatal flaw, because steel, despite its incredible strength, is surprisingly vulnerable to extreme heat. During the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, architects watched in absolute horror as iron structures they falsely believed to be fireproof melted and failed. Under extreme heat, unprotected structural steel loses its strength incredibly fast and can completely collapse in under an hour. A naked metal skeleton was just a disaster waiting to happen. So what do? Well, the engineer's brilliant solution was terracotta. Directly behind the daring ironworkers, a subsequent wave of workers moved through the rising skeleton. Their job was to meticulously hand-fit and mortar specialized clay tiles around every single exposed beam and column. Each piece of terracotta was uniquely shaped to fit the specific section of steel it was designed to protect, sealing that vulnerable metal safely away from any potential inferno. It was a massive, painstaking amount of manual labor happening right behind the steel framing. By 1895, watching all this unfold, I observed that this complex ballet had really become an uncompromising checklist. If you look at the technical history from sources like Britannica, the mature high-rise formula demanded 4 very specific elements: rolled steel I-beams, perfectly riveted connections, clay tile fireproofing, and deep, watertight caissons dug into the earth to hold the whole thing up. Not a single one of these dependent elements could be omitted if you wanted your skyscraper to actually stand.
As the decades rolled on and we reached 1930, these buildings climbed even higher, and the men who built them became the stuff of absolute legend. Ironworking evolved into one of the most romanticized trades in American industrial history. When the Empire State Building was going up, the photographer Louis Hine was commissioned to document it. And to capture the perfect shot of these high steel masters, Hine actually had himself suspended in a flimsy basket, dangling a terrifying 1,000 feet directly above Fifth Avenue. No way I'm doing that.
And his photos brilliantly illustrate the sheer breathtaking audacity of these workers. Hine captured images that modern safety regulations would completely outlaw today. His photographs show tradesmen casually sitting on open steel beams, calmly eating their lunch, chatting with their buddies, with absolutely nothing beneath their boots but 800 feet of empty air. It certainly puts our modern definition of a stressful workday into perspective, doesn't it? Now, let's step out of our early 1900s time machine for a moment and look at this from our modern perspective. Riveting actually dominated skyscraper construction for nearly 60 years. It wasn't until the 1950s that things fundamentally changed. Improvements in steel manufacturing meant the metal was finally standardized and reliable. Plus, advanced X-ray and inspection technologies meant we could finally look inside a weld to ensure there were no microscopic fractures. And as a result, that legendary four-man riveting gang was systematically phased out of the sky. But it's absolutely crucial to realize that riveting didn't end because it failed. It ended because the conditions that once made welding unreliable were finally resolved. The magnificent men who threw white-hot steel in the clouds weren't replaced by better workers. They were just replaced by better materials. The next time you walk past a historic skyscraper, remember that those first American skylines weren't built on formal building codes or proven safety metrics. They relied on the steady, daily, incredibly brave decision of these men to show up, balance on a beam, and do the work perfectly. These complex, forgotten systems and the master tradesmen who executed them literally shaped the skylines we walk under and take for granted every single day. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a genuine question to ponder. Which forgotten historical